I was driving home from my sister's place when the first flakes started falling. It was February, and the forecast had said light snow, maybe 3 inches. If you're out there listening right now, drop a comment with your city and the time. I want to know who else is awake in the quiet hours. I need to tell you about the night I got stuck at the service station on Route 9, because what happened there still doesn't sit right with me, and I've spent 3 years trying to find an explanation that holds. I was 28 then. I worked in Fairmont, and my sister lived an hour south, past the state line, in a town small enough that you knew everyone's business whether you wanted to or not. I'd been visiting her for the weekend. Nothing special, just sister time. The drive back was familiar. Route 9 cuts through farmland mostly, with patches of state forest breaking up the fields. In winter, it's empty. You can go 20 miles without seeing another car. The forecast that morning had said light snow, 3 inches, maybe 4, evening accumulation. I'd checked it twice before I left my sister's house at 6 p.m., and I'd felt fine about the drive. I had good tires. I had a full tank. The road was straight, and I knew it. By 6:30, the snow was coming down heavier than 3 inches worth. By 7 o'clock, I couldn't see the center line. I slowed to 35, then 30, watching the road disappear under a white blanket that had no interest in stopping. My headlights caught nothing but falling snow, thick and fast, the kind that makes you feel like you're driving through static. I wasn't panicking. Not yet. I was doing the math, 40 miles to home. At 30 miles an hour, that's just over an hour. I could do an hour. Then my engine light came on, not the check engine light, the temperature gauge, climbing fast, past the middle, past the 3/4 mark, into the red. I pulled over. The shoulder was invisible under the snow, but I felt the tires leave pavement and I stopped. I turned off the engine and I sat there in the sudden silence, watching the snow pile up on my windshield. I was maybe 25 miles from home. I was maybe 15 miles from my sister's place. I was exactly nowhere useful. I tried restarting the engine after 10 minutes. The temperature gauge dropped back to normal when I turned the key, and I felt a surge of relief so strong it made my hands shake. I eased back onto the road. 5 minutes later, the gauge climbed into the red again. This time when I pulled over, I saw the light. A 1/4 mile ahead, maybe less. A pale glow through the snow, the kind of light that meant building, shelter, help. I turned off the engine. I got out. The cold hit me like a wall. The wind was moving the snow sideways, and within 30 seconds my face was numb. I started walking toward the light. It was a service station, old, the kind that hasn't been updated since the 70s. Single pump out front, small building, flat roof. The light I'd seen was coming from inside, through a window beside the door. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped into warmth that felt like a gift. There was a space heater running in the corner, glowing orange. There was a counter with a cash register that looked like it belonged in a museum. There were shelves with oil cans and antifreeze and air fresheners shaped like pine trees. There was no one inside. I called out, "Hello?" Nothing. I walked to the counter. There was a clipboard there, the kind for tracking inventory. The top sheet had entries on it, dates, items, quantities. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. I called out again, "Anyone here?" The building was small. I could see the whole interior from where I stood. One room, no back office, no bathroom door, no place for anyone to be that I couldn't see. The space heater glowed. The light was on. The door had been unlocked. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes warming up, waiting for someone to come back from wherever they'd gone. Maybe they were outside. Maybe they were checking the pump. Then I noticed the window, the same window I'd seen the light through. From the inside, I could see my car on the road, barely visible through the snow. I could see the road itself, or the suggestion of it. I could see the snow falling, I could not see any tracks leading from the building to anywhere else. The snow outside was smooth, unbroken. If someone had left this building in the last 2 hours, and they would have had to because the snow had only been heavy for 2 hours, there would be tracks. There were no tracks. I felt something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. I looked at the space heater again. It was the kind you plug in. I followed the cord with my eyes. It went to an outlet on the wall. I looked at the light fixture, fluorescent, humming softly. I walked to the door and I looked at the lock. It was a simple turn lock, the kind you flip from the inside. It was in the unlocked position. Someone had unlocked this door. Someone had turned on the heater and the light. Someone had been here recently enough that the building was still warm. But no one had walked through 2 hours of heavy snow to get here. I left. I didn't run, but I didn't stay to think about it either. I went back to my car and I tried the engine again, and this time the temperature gauge stayed normal. I drove the remaining 20 miles home at 40 miles an hour, and the engine never overheated again. I went back to that stretch of Route 9 the following week. I drove it in daylight, in clear weather, looking for the service station. I didn't find it. I found farmland. I found forest. I found the specific curve in the road where I'd pulled over because I recognized the tree line. There was no service station, no building, no pump, no gravel lot, just an overgrown field on the west side of the road and a fence line that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I asked my sister about it later. She's lived in that area her whole life. I described the location, the building, the old-style pump. She said there used to be a service station there. Her dad had mentioned it once. It closed in 1981. The building was torn down in 1983. I don't know what I walked into that night. I don't know who turned on the heater, or the light, or unlocked the door. I don't know why my car overheated twice and then never again. What I know is that the snow was unbroken around a building that shouldn't have been there, and the heater was still warm. The apartment complex lost power at 2 a.m. I woke to complete darkness and a cold that was already working its way through the walls. Comment below if you've ever been stuck in a blizzard with no heat. I want to hear your stories. This happened in January of 2019 in a garden-style apartment complex in Marquette, Michigan. The kind of place where you share walls and ceilings with people you barely know, where every footstep above you is audible, where you learn the rhythms of your neighbors' lives whether you want to or not. I'd been living there for 8 months. Second floor, corner unit. I had someone above me on the 3rd floor, but I almost never heard them. No footsteps, no furniture scraping, no television through the ceiling. For 8 months, the upstairs apartment had been the quietest neighbor I'd ever had. I didn't even know if anyone lived up there. I'd never seen anyone coming or going from that unit. The mailbox for 3C had a name on it, something like Morrison or Madison, I don't remember exactly, but I'd never encountered the person attached to the name. The blizzard started on a Sunday afternoon. The weather service had been talking about it for 3 days. A major system, they said, lake effect off Superior, combining with a low-pressure system from the west. 18 to 24 inches expected. High winds, possible power outages. They were right about all of it. By evening, the snow was coming down so hard I couldn't see the parking lot from my window. By midnight, the wind was making sounds I'd never heard wind make before. Not howling, but roaring. A deep, sustained roar that made the building shake. The power went out at 2 a.m. I woke to silence. Not peaceful silence. The aggressive silence of a building that's supposed to hum with electricity and isn't humming anymore. No refrigerator, no heating system, no exit signs glowing in the hallway. I got up and checked my phone. No service. The cold was already noticeable. I have a winter sleeping bag that I keep for camping. I got it out of the closet and I set it up on my bed, layering it over my regular blankets. Then I put on thermal layers and a wool hat, and I got back into bed. I wasn't afraid. Not yet. It was just an outage. Power goes out in blizzards. The utility crews would get it running again as soon as they could work safely. That's when I heard the footsteps upstairs. Not loud, not running, just walking. A steady pace from one side of the apartment above me to the other. From what I estimated was the living room area to the bedroom area, then back again. I lay there in the dark, and I listened. The footsteps were deliberate, the kind of pacing someone does when they're thinking or worried or restless, back and forth, living room to bedroom, bedroom to living room. I'd never heard footsteps from 3C before. Not once in 8 months. I told myself it made sense. The person upstairs was awake because of the outage, same as me. They were cold, maybe, pacing to stay warm. It was a reasonable explanation. The pacing continued for maybe 10 minutes, then it stopped. I waited in the silence. The wind was still roaring outside, but inside the building, everything was still. Then I heard it again. The footsteps, same pattern, same pace, living room to bedroom, bedroom to living room. This time, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. The footsteps were too even, too regular. When a person paces, there are variations. A slightly longer stride, a pause to turn, a change in weight distribution. These footsteps had none of that. They were metronomic. Exactly the same interval between each step. Exactly the same weight. I counted. 12 steps from one end to the other. A pause of exactly 3 seconds. 12 steps back. Another 3-second pause. Then the pattern repeated. I lay there and I listened to it for an hour. The same pattern, over and over. 12 steps, 3 seconds. 12 steps, 3 seconds. I should have been annoyed. I should have been planning to file a noise complaint in the morning. Instead, I was feeling something else. Something that made me pull the sleeping bag tighter around myself. At 3:30 a.m., the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the silence before. I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, in the cold that was getting worse by the hour, and I stared at the ceiling. At 4 a.m., I heard my hallway door open. Not my apartment door. The door to the hallway, the building's common area. I heard it clearly, the hydraulic hinge that all the hallway doors in that complex had, the specific whoosh and click of the door closing. Someone had left their apartment and entered the hallway. I got out of bed. I went to my door and I looked through the peephole. The hallway was dark. Emergency lights were supposed to come on when the power failed, but they weren't on. Maybe their batteries had died. I couldn't see anything. I stood there with my eye to the peephole, looking into darkness, and I heard the stairwell door open. The stairwell was at the end of my hallway, maybe 30 feet from my door. I heard the door, and then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Going down, not up. Someone from the 3rd floor was going downstairs. I don't know why I opened my door. I should have stayed inside. But I opened it, just a crack, and I looked down the hallway toward the stairwell. The stairwell door was closing. I caught a glimpse of it in the last second before it shut, but I didn't see anyone. I stepped into the hallway. The cold out there was worse than in my apartment. My breath came out in clouds. I walked to the stairwell door. I opened it. The stairwell was concrete and metal, and it echoed. If someone was walking down those stairs, I would hear it. The acoustics of that space carried every sound. I heard nothing. I looked down. The stairs descended into darkness. I couldn't see past the first landing. I should mention something here. The stairwell in that building only went 2 directions. Up to the 3rd floor, or down to the 1st floor and the exit. There was nowhere else to go. If someone had gone through that door 30 seconds before I did, they would still be in the stairwell, either going down or going up. The stairwell was silent. I went back to my apartment. I locked the door. I put a chair in front of it, which is something I had never done before and have never done since. I got back into bed, and I lay there until morning. The power came back on at 7 a.m. I heard the building come back to life. The heating system kicked in. The refrigerator started humming. My phone found service again. I waited until 9 a.m. Then I went upstairs to 3C. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Nothing. I went to the building manager's office. A woman named Carol, mid-50s, who'd worked there for 15 years. I asked her about 3C. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, 3C's been vacant since August. I told her that couldn't be right. I'd heard someone up there during the night. Footsteps, pacing. She shook her head. The previous tenant moved out in August. We haven't released it yet, it's empty. I asked her if anyone had access to it. Maintenance, maybe. She said maintenance hadn't been in that unit for months, not since the final walkthrough after the previous tenant left. She asked me if I wanted her to check the unit with me. We went upstairs. She unlocked the door to 3C. The apartment was empty, no furniture, no belongings. Carpet cleanly vacuumed, walls bare, kitchen spotless. The smell of a place that hasn't been occupied in a long time. Stale air, dust, absence. Carol walked through it with me. Every room. There was nothing there. I asked her about the previous tenant, the one who'd moved out in August. She hesitated. Then she said he'd died. Not in the apartment. He'd been found outside in the parking lot during a cold snap in late July. Heart attack, they thought. He'd been coming back from his car. I still live in that complex. Different unit now on the first floor. I requested a transfer in February, and they accommodated me. The apartment above me now is occupied by a family with 2 kids. I hear them all the time. Footsteps, voices, furniture moving. All the normal sounds of people living their lives. Sometimes at night, when the building is quiet, I think about 3C, about the footsteps that were too regular, about the hallway door I heard open, and the stairwell that was silent when it shouldn't have been. 12 steps. 3 seconds. 12 steps. 3 seconds. I still hear the pattern sometimes, in that space between waking and sleep. The ranger station was supposed to be a 2-night stay. I had planned for it carefully, checked the forecast twice, and packed 4 days of supplies just in case. If you've ever stayed alone in a cabin during a storm, let me know in the comments. I'm curious how many of you know that specific kind of quiet. This was February of 2021 in the Monongahela National Forest. I'd reserved the ranger station through the Forest Service website, a small cabin they rent out in winter for people who want backcountry access without the full commitment of tent camping in the snow. The station sat at the end of a fire road, about 4 miles from the nearest plowed route. You had to hike in or snowshoe, depending on conditions. When I arrived on Thursday afternoon, the snow was packed firm enough to walk on without sinking. The sky was gray but stable. The forecast said the storm would arrive Friday night, 6 to 10 inches. I'd planned to stay Thursday and Friday, then hike out Saturday morning before the accumulation got serious. The cabin was basic. 1 room, wood stove, 2 bunks, a table, a bench. The windows had shutters you could close from inside. There was a logbook on the table where visitors signed no-name date, planned departure. I added my entry and read back through the recent ones. The last person had been there 3 weeks ago. I got the fire going and I settled in. That first night was exactly what I'd wanted. Quiet, cold outside and warm inside. The sound of wind in the pines. I read for a while, ate a simple dinner, went to sleep early. Friday was the same. I snowshoed a loop trail in the morning, came back, kept the fire going, made coffee. The storm was supposed to arrive after dark. By late afternoon, the sky had the specific weight that comes before heavy snow. That pressure you can feel in your sinuses. The snow started around 8 p.m., I watched it through the window for a while. Big flakes coming down steady but not aggressive. I closed the shutters, stoked the fire, and went to bed. I woke sometime in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was. I hadn't brought a watch, and I'd turned my phone off to save battery. The fire had burned down to coals. The cabin was cold enough that I could see my breath in the red glow from the stove. I got up to add wood. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Outside. In the snow. Not the sound of an animal moving through the woods. The deliberate crunch of boots on snow, walking at a steady pace. I stood by the stove and I listened. The footsteps circled the cabin. I could track them by sound. They started at the front, moved along the east side, continued to the back, came around the west side, returned to the front. Then they stopped. I waited in the dark. The only light was the glow from the stove's air vents. The footsteps started again. The same circuit. Front, east, back, west, front. They completed the loop 3 times. Then silence. I should have opened the door. That's what a rational person does when they hear someone walking around their cabin in the middle of the night. You open the door, and you call out, and you see if someone needs help. I didn't open the door. Something about the pace of those steps kept me inside. They weren't hurried. They weren't hesitant. They were the footsteps of someone who was doing something deliberately, and whatever they were doing, I didn't want to interrupt it. I added wood to the stove. I got back into my sleeping bag. I lay there, and I listened to the silence. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I opened the door. The storm had passed, the sky was clear and the sun was up, and everything was buried under at least 16 inches of new snow. The snow around the cabin was smooth, untouched. The drifts were sculpted by wind into soft curves, and there wasn't a mark on any of it. I walked around the cabin, all 4 sides. The snow was deep and even, and there were no tracks anywhere. I checked the perimeter carefully. I know what tracks look like in fresh snow even after wind. Wind doesn't erase tracks completely. It softens them, fills them partially, but the depressions remain visible, especially tracks that would have been made in the middle of the night, only a few hours before dawn. There were no depressions, no compressed snow, nothing. I stood there in the cold morning and I tried to make it make sense. I went back inside. I looked at the logbook again. I flipped back through the pages, reading entries from the past year. One entry caught my attention. It was from last March. A single line. Heard someone walking around the cabin during the storm. Didn't see anyone in the morning. No name. The signature line was blank. I kept reading. 2 entries before that, from January. Something circled the station last night. No tracks at first light. Another blank signature. I went back further. November, the year before. If you hear footsteps at night, stay inside. That one was signed. A first name only, Renee. I closed the logbook. I packed my gear. The snow was deep enough that leaving was going to be a difficult hike, but I started anyway. It took me 3 hours to cover the 4 miles back to my car. The snow was above my knees in places, and I had to push through drifts that came up to my thighs. When I reached the parking area, I saw another car, a Subaru with Montana plates covered in snow. Someone else was here. I waited for about 20 minutes, standing by my car, thinking maybe whoever owned the Subaru was coming out from a different trail. No one came. I cleared the snow off my windshield and I left. I reported the abandoned car to the ranger station in town. Gave them the plate number and the location. They said they'd check it out. A week later, I called back to follow up. I asked if they'd found the owner of the Subaru. The ranger I spoke to said there'd been no car in that parking area. They'd sent someone to check the day after I called, and the lot was empty. I told him that didn't make sense. I'd seen it. I'd written down the plate number. He said their records showed no vehicles in that lot for the entire week, and no hiking permits issued for that area in February. I asked about the ranger station logbook, specifically the entries that mentioned footsteps and missing tracks. He said the station's logbook got replaced every season. The old ones were stored at the district office. He could check if I wanted. I said yes. He called me back 2 days later. He'd found the logbook from the previous year. He'd read through the entries I mentioned, the ones about footsteps. He said those entries weren't in the book. I asked him what he meant. He said there were entries from the dates I'd given him, but none of them mentioned footsteps or tracks. Just standard check-ins, weather notes, mileage logs. I didn't go back to that ranger station. It's still there, available for rent on the Forest Service website. The listing says it's a peaceful winter retreat, perfect for solitude. I think about those footsteps sometimes, 3 circuits around the cabin, and then silence, the snow that showed nothing in the morning. I think about the entries in the logbook that may or may not have been there. And I think about the Subaru, with Montana plates that the rangers said was never in the parking lot. I don't have an explanation that fits. I've looked for one, and I haven't found it. What I have is this. Something walked around that cabin while I was inside. I heard it clearly. 3 times around, in fresh snow, in the middle of a blizzard. And in the morning, the snow was smooth. The radio kept cutting in and out, which wasn't unusual for that stretch of highway. What came through during the static, though, that was unusual. Drop a comment if you've ever driven through a whiteout. I want to know what highway you were on. I need to tell you about a drive I took in March of 2020, before everything else that happened that year, before the world changed in the ways it changed. This was just winter being winter in northern Vermont, and me being someone who thought she knew how to handle it. I was driving from Burlington to my parents' place in Newport, which is about 90 miles if you take Route 5 up along the Connecticut River. It's not a complicated drive. 2 lanes most of the way, some hills, some curves, but nothing technical. The storm wasn't supposed to be serious. The forecast that morning said 4 to 6 inches, starting late afternoon. I left Burlington at 3 p.m., figuring I'd beat the worst of it. By 4:30, I was in it. Not 4 to 6 inches. This was 8, 10, maybe more, coming down so fast the road was disappearing. The wind was pushing the snow sideways. My wipers were struggling to keep up. I slowed to 40, then 35. The highway wasn't empty. There were a few other cars, red taillights ahead of me in the white, but they were spaced far apart. Everyone keeping their distance. Everyone focused on just keeping the car straight. The radio was playing something I wasn't paying attention to. Background noise. I had it on low, just for the company. That's when the static started. It came in gradually. First just a flutter under the music, then longer bursts. Then the music was gone entirely, and it was just static. I reached to change the station. Before I could press the button, the static cleared. A voice came through. Not the DJ, not a weather report. A voice that sounded wrong. It said, "You need to pull over." I looked at the radio. The station display still showed 92.7, the Burlington station I'd been listening to. The voice said, "There's a car in your lane. You need to pull over now." My hands tightened on the wheel. I looked ahead. All I could see was white. The snow was so thick I couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of me. The voice said, "Pull over, right now." I don't know why I listened. Maybe because the voice sounded certain. Maybe because something in my gut responded to the urgency in it. I eased onto the shoulder. My tires hit the rumble strip, and I felt the car slow as it left the pavement. I came to a stop. I sat there with my hazards on, my heart beating hard, looking out at the whiteout. And then I saw it, a dark shape in my lane, exactly where I would have been if I hadn't pulled over. A car, stopped, no lights, just sitting there in the middle of the northbound lane like a stone in a river. I would have hit it. At 35 miles an hour in a blizzard, I would have hit it head on, and I wouldn't have seen it until it was too late. I sat on the shoulder, and I watched the dark shape through the snow. It didn't move. After maybe a minute, I saw another set of headlights behind me. Another car coming up the highway. I watched as it slowed, swerved, barely missed the stopped car. The second car pulled over ahead of me. I saw brake lights, then a door opening. Someone got out and walked toward the stopped car. I should have gotten out too, should have helped, but I was shaking too hard to trust my legs. I looked at the radio. It was playing music again. The same station, no static, like nothing had happened. I waited on the shoulder for about 10 minutes. I saw the person who'd gotten out walk back to their car. I saw both cars, the one that had stopped and the one that had nearly hit it, start moving again, slowly, continuing north. When they were gone, I eased back onto the highway. I drove the rest of the way to Newport at 25 miles an hour, both hands on the wheel, and I didn't touch the radio again. I got to my parents' house just after 6 p.m. My mom took one look at me and asked what was wrong. I told her about the car in the road, about almost hitting it. I didn't tell her about the voice. She said there'd been accidents all up and down Route 5 that day. 3 vehicles off the road between Burlington and St. Johnsbury. 2 near misses reported by other drivers. I asked if anyone had called in about a stopped car in the northbound lane. She didn't know. She'd just heard it on the local news. I waited 2 days before I called the radio station. I told myself I needed to know if they'd broadcast some kind of emergency alert that I'd heard wrong. If maybe there'd been a traffic report I'd misunderstood. The person I talked to was polite. She checked their broadcast logs for the date and time I gave her. She said they hadn't aired any traffic alerts that day. They'd been running their normal programming, music and pre-recorded station IDs. Nothing live. The DJ had called in sick, so everything was automated. I asked if maybe another station had bled through. Interference, cross signal, something. She said it was possible, but unlikely. Their signal was strong in that area, and even if another station had come through, it would have been a station voice. Someone would have identified themselves. I asked her what she meant by identified themselves. She said FCC regulations require station identification. Anyone broadcasting has to say their call letters. It's the law. The voice on my radio hadn't said any call letters. It had just told me to pull over. I've driven Route 5 a dozen times since then. I always keep the radio on. I've been through rain, fog, clear weather, and one other snowstorm. Nothing like that March storm, but enough to make the road difficult. The radio has never cut out like that again. No static, no voice, just music and talk shows and the occasional weather report. But I think about it, the voice that knew there was a car in my lane, that knew I needed to pull over, and knew it with enough certainty to make me listen. I've looked for explanations. I've read about radio interference, about CB bleed through, about emergency broadcast protocols. Nothing quite fits. What I keep coming back to is this. The voice knew. It knew before I could see. It knew with enough time to warn me. I don't know who was speaking. I don't know what station it came from, or if it came from a station at all. What I know is that I pulled over, and the car was there, and I didn't hit it. The voice was right. My uncle's farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. When the blizzard warning came through, he called and asked if I'd come stay with him for a few days. If you've ever stayed with family during a storm, let me know in the comments. There's something different about weathering bad weather with people you've known your whole life. This happened in February of 2018. My uncle, my mother's brother, lived alone on a farm in central Wyoming, about 40 miles outside Casper. He'd been there since the 80s, raising cattle until his health made that impossible, and then just maintaining the property because it was his and he wasn't ready to leave it. He was 73 that winter, still sharp, still capable, but not someone who should be alone during a serious storm. When the weather service started talking about a blizzard, a real one, 18 to 30 inches, winds up to 50 miles an hour, my mother asked me to drive out and stay with him. I got there on a Wednesday afternoon. The sky was gray and low, and the air had that electric feeling that comes before big weather. My uncle met me at the door, said he'd made coffee, said he appreciated me coming, but I shouldn't have worried. I stayed anyway. The farmhouse was warm. He'd stocked up. Canned goods, bread, batteries, firewood for the stove in the living room. He still had the old oil furnace, which meant as long as the power stayed on, we'd have heat. And if the power went out, we had the wood stove as backup. We spent Wednesday evening playing cards and talking about nothing important. He went to bed around 9. I stayed up reading until about 11, then turned in. The storm arrived just after midnight. I woke to the sound of wind like I'd never heard before. Not howling, screaming. The kind of wind that makes a house creak in places you didn't know could creak. I got up and looked out the window. I couldn't see anything. Just white. The yard light was on, but the snow was so thick it turned the light into a dim glow that showed nothing beyond itself. I went back to bed. The wind was loud, but the house was solid. I fell back asleep. The second time I woke, it was to a different sound. Banging, rhythmic, metal on wood. I sat up and listened. 3 bangs, then a pause. 3 bangs, then a pause. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the barn. I got dressed and went downstairs. My uncle was already in the kitchen pulling on his boots. "Barn door," he said. "Latch must have come loose." I asked if he wanted me to go fix it. He shook his head. "We'll both go, safer that way." We put on our coats and gloves. He grabbed a flashlight and handed me one. We went out through the back door into the storm. The cold hit like a fist. The wind pushed against me so hard I had to lean into it to stay upright. The snow was already deep, above my ankles, maybe closer to my knees in the drifts. The barn was maybe 50 yards from the house. We used the flashlights to find our way, though they didn't help much. The snow ate the light. We could hear the banging getting louder as we got closer. The barn door, the big sliding door on the south side, swinging open and slamming shut in the wind. My uncle reached it first. He grabbed the door on the next swing and held it. I helped him push it closed. Together we lifted the latch and dropped it into place. The banging stopped. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath. My uncle shone his flashlight on the latch. "That's strange," he said. I asked what he meant. He pointed. The latch was the kind you lift to open, a heavy metal bar that drops into a U-shaped bracket. To come loose on its own, the wind would have had to lift it straight up. "Wind doesn't blow up," he said. I looked at the latch. He was right. The latch could only open if something lifted it. The wind might blow the door open once the latch was up, but it couldn't lift the latch itself. My uncle didn't say anything else. We walked back to the house. Inside, we took off our coats and boots. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table and didn't talk about the latch. At 3 a.m., the banging started again. We looked at each other. My uncle stood up. I stood up with him. We got dressed again. We went back out into the storm. The barn door was open, swinging in the wind, banging against the frame. The latch was up. We closed the door again. This time, my uncle took a piece of rope from his coat pocket and tied the latch down. He knotted it 3 times. "That should hold," he said. We went back inside. At 4:30 a.m., the banging started a 3rd time. My uncle was already standing when I came downstairs. He was at the kitchen window, looking out toward the barn. I asked if we were going back out. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No." I asked why not. He said, "Something wants that door open. I'm not going to fight about it anymore." We sat in the kitchen and listened to the banging. 3 hits, pause. 3 hits, pause. It went on for about 20 minutes. Then it stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. One moment the banging was there, the next it wasn't. We sat in the silence. The wind was still screaming outside, but the barn door was quiet. My uncle said, "Let's check on it at first light." We waited. Neither of us went back to bed. We just sat there drinking coffee until the sky started to gray. At dawn, we went out to the barn. The snow had piled up overnight. We had to push through drifts that came up to our thighs. It took us 10 minutes to cover the 50 yards. When we reached the barn, the door was closed. The latch was down, in place. The rope my uncle had tied was still knotted around it, exactly as he'd left it. The door was shut and latched. It couldn't have been banging. But we'd both heard it. For 20 minutes we'd sat in that kitchen and listened to the unmistakable sound of the barn door banging open and shut. My uncle walked around to the other side of the barn. I followed him. We checked every door, every window, every piece of loose metal that might bang in the wind. Everything was secure. Everything was latched or nailed down or too small to make the sound we'd heard. We went inside the barn. It was dark and cold and empty. My uncle didn't keep animals anymore. Just some old equipment, bales of hay he sold to a neighbor, tools on the walls. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing had moved. We walked back to the house without talking. The storm lasted 2 more days. We never heard the banging again. I stayed until Friday, when the roads were clear enough for me to drive home. Before I left, I asked my uncle if he'd heard anything like that before. He said yes. Once, about 5 years ago during another blizzard. Same thing, barn door banging, but when he went to check it was latched. I asked if he'd told anyone. He said no. Who would he tell? And what would he say? I think about that sometimes. The sound of the door banging in the wind, clear and loud and unmistakable. The door that was closed and latched when we finally checked it in the daylight. My uncle passed away last year. The farm was sold to a family from Cheyenne. I thought about reaching out to them, about asking if they'd experienced anything unusual during storms. I decided against it. Some things are better left as questions, but I still wonder what wanted that door open, and I wonder if it's still there, waiting for the next blizzard, trying the latch again in the dark.